And that is Counterpower Radio Hour. Following me, Counterpower. What the hell does that mean? Were you trying to counter me? You say what?
I said no, we're not trying to counter you.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm just wondering what's going on with
that. That's why we invited you to stick around.
Anyway, life goes on. I'm telling you, even when I was in Vietnam, it was a bad situation. We still managed to have a little bit of fun in the situation at hand. So it's bad times, and you gonna sit down there, man, and get ready to do your show?
Oh yeah, I'm waiting for. We got to get Felix in the driver's seat there.
Okay, well Felix needs to come on over here and get in the driver's seat, so I can get ready to get up out of the driver's seat, and I'll see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock. There again at 1:30. So tomorrow, until then, who knows? I may not even go anywhere. I may just hang around.
Never let the ghost of the WDBX.
Yeah, just stay here.
And now, the Counterpower Radio Hour. I feel like we would be remiss not to play our opening music, though.
Let's do it.
So can I throw it? Would that be okay?
Oh, that's fine with me.
Okay, well then we're gonna play Talib Kweli Nube Fiasco after all, and we'll be back. Heavy as heaven, I am Atlas, managed to balance massive masses on my back without killing my glasses. This is not purely passes. Oh geez, this is so me. Asses, mini mansion low, homie, low bony, but the rhymes is fat. In fact, just like a Rochester customer, God bless the mothers and younger brothers of hustlers, cause she don't wanna solve it as break, but he wanna follow in his steps, bang his hat, learn his shakes, master his swagger in the bathroom mirror, cop a Chevy, steady mob in his place. Yeah, it's just a problem when you face look his mom's in her face. Sun don't shine after all. Sun don't shine on me. I need you all to be clear on exactly what I'm saying. For your attention to span to understand that I ain't playing. You mistaken if you somehow think it's just me you facing. Staring me down while your enemy is standing adjacent. My heart is racing, but I know just what I stand for. We chasing death carelessly like Jessica. I care more who said. Just because no one can understand how you speak, don't necessarily mean that what you be saying is deep. In case you die in your sleep, you ask the Lord for a blessing. Sometimes I sneak up so quiet that the silence is deafening. You never know who the assassin is until it's your time to go. Your life is flashing, asking for forgiveness, but you move too slow. Now the people that you love bear the pain that you was harbored. You was living for yourself, so you could never be a martyr. Life is hard, death is harder. You somebody baby father, someone's lover, son of your mother, somebody's brother, somebody nigga. Now your spirit in the air like a whisper. Hearing your name mentioned when we pouring out some liquor. The days go by quicker and the nights don't seem to differ. It's getting cold, so I shiver and have to cold. And he leaves the house that love built that, her renovated that, Section 8 pays for. Well, let's pray for him, let the beat play for him. Put his struggles on display for him, cause he got his own face the drummer. Get a different face from the one that he used to face his mama. If you look close, you will see a distance of a smile that hurts the ice grill and a trace of trauma. No bit of his father, another criterion that's no different from a young Liberian who let the delirium living living in the inner city out of his mind. Living is like a silly. I'm cool, I don't foretell best. I ain't nice as MC, I ain't Cornell West, I am Cornell Westside, Chi-Town Rivera. Malcolm exercise the demons, gangsta leaning. We traded in this kufi for a new era. Chosen 44 for a waterfall. I ain't accredited institute graduate. I ain't from Nazareth. My conception wasn't immaculate. I ain't messing no calculus. A good addition to the rap audio. I backflipped on the mattress they slept on me on. What else, Joe? Knowing this half the battle. Fight reputation, half an apple. Shake the snakes, hit the system. Let's get into it.
And we're back.
Here we are, Counterpower Radio Hour. Pepper Holder just asked, what does that counterpower thing mean? We used to go over that, or at least
routinely,
that might
ad nauseum.
Show, so we may as well talk about it now. What do you think this thing counterpower means, Felix?
So, as I understand it, potentially multiple meanings, right? So there's the implication of direct contestation with the powers that be, with concentrated power, refusing to subordinate ourselves to the exercise of power over. So there's that element, but there's also this idea of trying to construct a different power, a form of mutual empowerment apart from that exercise of power over and from that presumed authority.
Yeah, that's the thing that I think is really worth emphasizing for me about it, and why I was excited about the name. It's like, rather than some model of activism that sees us like trying to, I don't know, in various ways ask for people in power to like change what they do, to instead start looking to one another and building up a different kind of power that makes those idiots irrelevant. Man, I've actually been quite nervous about this show. Like, I've been thinking about it. You know, normally I just like wake up, I'm like, okay, go to the show, say whatever's on my mind.
Yeah, nervousness is not usually your forte.
Yeah, I know, but like, the South Carolina thing really bothers me. Look at the euphemisms I use. The South Carolina thing. Like, sorry, like, Dylan Roof's murder of 9 black people in a black church freaks me out. And what freaks me out even more is the, like, kind of silence that I've heard about it. Like, let us say, the relative silence that I've seen among people, and felt even in myself, among like radicals and other people about it. Like it's almost like too terrifying or weird or not easily politically like fitting politically with our normal like discourse, that like we didn't immediately like start talking about it and start thinking about like, well, what to do about it, or is there something that could be done about it? And like, I mean, obviously like nothing can be done in the sense of like repairing like the lives that were lost and like the terror that has been spread, and more on that word later, as a result of this. And like, I can't imagine what it's like being a black person going to church on Sunday now, you know? And like that, well, okay, Pepper's reaching his hand out, but let me just, okay.
Going to church on Sunday, you ought to see trying to go to work on Monday if you can get a job. As far as going to church on Sunday, I find that you there, when I did go to church, was about the most relaxed environment where you could be comforted by those in thought, pretty much to surrounding yourself within like thought, like kind. But you think, the question is, and this is one I've been asking different people, who do they think what do they think his objective was? Was it to aim at the people? Was it to aim at the church? You know, now this is what choosing this particular building, choosing that particular time of day, what was he aiming at?
That's actually quite an easy question to answer, unfortunately. And this notion, because that was the first narrative that like conservatives, fascists, like the Fox News people were first like hitting on. They're like, well, this wasn't an anti-black murder, this was an anti-Christian attack. And like he says in his little manifesto here quite clearly, this is the second to last paragraph. He says, I have no choice. I am not in the position to alone go into the ghetto and fight. I chose Charleston because it's the most historic city in my state and at one time had the highest ratio of blacks to white in the country. We have no skinheads, no real KKK, no one doing anything but talking on the internet. Well, someone has to have the bravery to take it to the real world, and I guess that has to be me. And that he's referring to is what he's laid out in the previous, couple thousand words, which is just like a straight up racist, it's a straight up white supremacist doctrine updated for the contemporary age. And this is the thing. Yeah, you guys.
But with respect to the organized religion, so we talked on our last broadcast about the pervasiveness of Christian fundamentalism, but we never really have fully addressed the other undercurrent of religion in the United States, which is the strong liberationist elements of the Black Church.
Sure.
Which I think is one of the primary reason why it was a target.
Well, according to him, anyway, the primary reason it's a target is these are easy victims.
That too.
That he would rather, as he says, like go into the ghetto and just like start shooting people up.
Sure,
you can't do that alone. And here's a place where you can take out a bunch of people in like in relative safety to himself.
Sure. I mean, I don't doubt that was also an underlying motive, but there's also the reason that folks are congregating there to begin with and what it represents too, right?
Sure. I mean, like, yeah, I'm just speaking from the evidence that we have about his motives. But like, as Pepper was just mentioning, and as you're bringing up, like the Black Church in America historically has had like rather than like the classical analysis of religion as the opiate of the people, like the Black Church has had like a serious engagement with social transformation and has been like a place where people are like not only organizing but also like gaining the spiritual resources to fight to be something other than like considered non-humans by the state and by the white supremacists that founded and run this country.
And just real quickly, because I think it's maybe worth mentioning, when we were both in Ferguson during the Ferguson October events, and there was a otherwise innocuous sort of event that took place in one of the stadiums, and there was a gathering of leaders within the different religious institutions that came together to discuss issues related to Ferguson and the killing of Black lives. And some of us initially were like somewhat dismissive, but then we also and I think you pointed this out at the time, like recognized the resonance of the message and why and the history behind it too. So I wondered if maybe you could just like quickly.
Well, the thing that was so significant about that event, for me anyway, to watch was both. First of all, like there were some like great speakers who were connecting the moment of like the Ferguson uprising with the history of Black struggle, but then also there were like activists, young people who had been like in the streets, been fighting the cops, and been like standing up for their friend Mike Brown's legacy for, at that point, like, I don't know, 60, 80 days or something. Almost 100 days, actually. And they interrupted.
But during the NAACP leaders, not during the religious stuff.
Yeah. And it was very interesting because that speaker, the NAACP leader, was the person who was most kind of invoking the cadence of Dr. Martin Luther King and stuff, and he sounded like a voice from the past, and they like stood up, stopped him, and said like, why aren't you guys in the streets? And you don't, and they said, y'all keep saying the same thing, you've been saying the same thing for 30 years, and like we're not listening anymore. You're just trying to calm us down. Here's Pepper again.
What you were speaking about is when they turned their back on me.
Yeah. The first part of it, and then they ended up going on the stage. Yeah.
Right. But anyway, then the NAACP, for which I am a member, and also for those who may not know, I wear several different hats. I have a Greek fisherman hat on today. But I am the vice president of the Carbonell branch of the NAACP. And one of the things that seems to be somewhat frustrating to me, as well as to others, and no doubt to those younger people, is how these things evolve within the structure of NAACP's participation. But yet still, they have been the ones who've been able to stay the longest. There's no other organization in the United States that has the depth, the history, the longevity of the NAACP, equal to the NAACP. None. So, what needs to be done is these young minds, these young legs, these strong backs need to fortify what is already here. And then that way, those things that are needed for these young minds and strong backs and future people would be well understood and developed through working with the NAACP. And this is not a promotion for the NAACP, but it is a fact that the NAACP has the longevity, it has the history, it has all the ingredients, the things that you need to go forth and who has somewhat been able to protect you. I'm not saying that there are not other things that need to be done. In reference of protection, there were members of the NAACP in South Carolina or North Carolina, I'm not exactly sure. Deacons for Defense. Somebody's got that book of mine. Was it you? Okay. But Negroes with Guns by Robert somebody. I can't think of his last name. Negroes with Guns. There's a movie I've been trying to get people to look at. It's called Deacons for Defense. But it's more than a movie talking about Deacons for Defense. Who were the original Deacons for Defense? Why was the purpose of the Deacons for Defense? Should there have been a Deacon for Defense in Charleston, South Carolina? Should there be one in Rock Hill Baptist Church here in Carbondale, Illinois? Should that attitude, should that situation be, how do I protect my home? And Negroes with Guns. In the book, one of the things that talks about when Negroes had guns, that there was less attempt upon Negro lives. You know, how do you do the defense against those perpetrating ills from the badge standpoint? I got a badge on me, yet still, what was the probable cause to stop the Negro?
There's another really good book, This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed, How Guns Made the Civil Rights Movement Possible by Charles E. Cobb Jr.
So that I was just looking up too.
Oh, Margaret and I are always on the same page.
So one of the things that Pepper, you're bringing up here, well, you just said a couple of things. So like the first thing is like I don't think those Ferguson activists were necessarily saying like the NAACP should like no longer exist. I think that they were saying that like in fact the what you're saying like well it has a longevity that no other institution has, but like I think they might counter, and I don't know enough about this, but like my sense is like just appealing to the longevity of an organization is also like recognizing that it's somehow adapted to the way things are going, and like the what there needs to be is like groundswells that might provide like a new political analysis and a new energy for that organization, or it might form new organizations that otherwise like can't yet be thought of, you know. But like I'm not sure. Right. All I can say is like I was witness to like this moment that seemed like history. That is to say, it seemed like a novel intervention into the history of Black struggle, in which like a younger group of people was like saying like our concerns and our lives are not being expressed in your words. And it was very interesting the way that night ended, because it ended with Cornel West, who I think is an astoundingly wise human being and a great philosopher. And he spoke last, and he did maybe what a lot of great philosophers do. He attempted a sort of mediation that didn't cover over the differences. And what he said, was, I mean, this was after like half the speakers were canceled. Those young kids were invited up on the stage.
Lots of people just came down.
Just like
stage floor,
kind
including
of,
us.
kind of flooded the stage area. It changed the entire atmosphere. What was this kind of like, very formal event? And what Wes said, he both like welcomed that coming in and like affirmed what these young kids were saying. But then he said, look, if your cultural reference point is only music from the last 5 years, you don't have what it takes to engage in this kind of struggle. And it's interesting he framed it in terms of music, right? But because for West, and for a lot of people, right, music this is where a lot of spiritual nourishment comes from. This is where like the complexity of spirit that can sustain energy comes from. And he was saying, don't be too quick to break completely with the past. You need that. Now, yes, things have changed, but don't think you can write off these experiences. And I think, I don't know, Pepper, does that sound like wise to you?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm trying to say is that here you have the wheel is already around. You need not change it. You might need to add a spoke to it. And in that spoke, what was taking place that you don't see that was during my time was the youth. It was the youth who really pushed the civil rights movement. It ain't got us from Martin Luther King, but I found that even Martin Luther King got his strength from the women in the church, and the women in the community. And with these women pushing a few good men out there, because others had to go to work or try to find work to support the women, to take care of the children. It was the few good men, women, and the youth. Now, so where's the youth now with the NAACP? Where's the youth with the Southern Christian Leadership? Whatever group it is, where is the youth in the foundation of those things that have brought us across?
Maybe I'll say this, is that like since Ferguson, right, a lot, I mean, in a way that we haven't seen since the 70s, black youth are in the streets. And the question is like, where's the NAACP?
And is it a coincidence?
Are they
go ahead.
No, they may not be in the streets, but I tell you what they are. They're in the boardroom. They're in the daggum courthouse. They're observing this, and they're advocating for that. They need some strength and numbers from the youth to come and support the NAACP. There are many different categories of social things that the NAACP represents. So then, if you find a particular one that's within your framework, your genre, what you wish to work with, be it education, be it jobs, be it criminal, be it health, be it whatever it may be, housing or lack of housing, whatever it is, the NAACP has a position that you can come and work with and a structure that you can engage and follow and empower the NAACP as well as empower yourself. So then, I'll endorse the NAACP to you.
Okay. I was asking kind of like trying to like do justice to this moment that I saw there, but like I mean we've gotten kind of way off track talking about this thing that happened 4 months ago.
But I wanted to ask, is it a coincidence that this happens in the wake of Ferguson and Baltimore? And
I mean, I don't think so, right? I think what like, well, there's a lot of things to say, right? Like first of all, I think that since the 1970s, like white supremacists have been like waiting for this kind of thing, right? Waiting for another movement of black people standing up for themselves, and they've been arming themselves for such a thing, right? And this is part of like, I don't know,
with the tacit support of the political and economic elite, because it's a very important divisive strategy.
You are mistaken.
let's hear.
You said arming themselves and so forth. That arming themselves is not just solely aimed at black people, or it's aimed at a political structure. These people they're confused. Am I Tea Party? Am I Republican? Am I this or am I that? And this is where this confusion comes in as the promotion, the marketing to arm yourselves and all that. But I say you should arm yourself, and then before we say you have this communities or tribalism emerging, that's where you see so much of the division instead of the collaboration of how is your life going and how is mine going, and those things that we wish to have for you. The same thing we find in common. What do we share in common that we need? How do we get there? And who do I have? Who is my enemy? Who am I fighting against?
I think, yeah, a lot of people are totally confused and, like, deeply afraid. Definitely. But I also think, like, here's something that really, like, strikes me and frightens me about what this kid, Dylan Roof, like, writes and how he writes. Like, I'm almost like, it's strange to say it, but, like, okay, the notion that he is, like, mentally ill is ridiculous. Like, in fact, this kid is rational. He's wrong. He's working from a ridiculous set of premises and historical assumptions, but he's logically connecting those things up. He's smart, he's thinking, and he's drawing the practical conclusions from a racist ideology.
Stop calling him a kid. He's a man. And in that man, by saying kid, you're giving him a little bit of room to be not misguided. He's not misguided, as you're saying. And this man should feel the full weight of justice on his ass for the harm and crime that he's done.
Fair enough.
What I had told you before we got on, Margaret, I'm really interested in exploring, though, like, why it is that racist ideology resonates so much with somebody like that. Because I think that's an important question. Because it's not just him, and it's not just people with relative privilege, white privilege, but not necessarily in power. I mean, this guy is somebody who dropped out of high school, was extremely low income, had no life prospects whatsoever, and it seems like possibly as a result of that, a racist message then had like that much more potency because it provided him a sense of superiority. It's like an age-old tactic, and it seemed to work in this case like it does in thousands of others.
But the thing that I want to emphasize is that, like, actually racism structures America.
Sure.
And there has, since the 1970s in particular, been, like, a new wave in which of racial war, right, of white supremacist war on black people that has not been allowed to call itself racist. And so when this guy encounters a racist ideology that then explains the world around him, explains the racist world around him, it sticks, right? Because in fact, like, the world is racist. That is to say, the American state has constructed a world in which race is an unavoidable factor in the way that resources are distributed, in the way in like the lives that people live. But go ahead. And so there is a need then for someone to, like, embrace like the ability to, like, describe their world in terms of race. But then there's other things that you're saying, right?
Yeah.
The insecurity, the lack of life prospects, and what he's done, right, is rather than recognizing that actually, like, the American state is white supremacist, has been since its inception, and has enacted a racial caste system since, like, in a new kind of multicultural language over the last 40 years. He reads it as, and he reads the relative like progress that has been made as a result of the black struggle as like as a threat to the way things ought to be, right? As a threat to white supremacy. And so that's the thing that I think is so interesting. Like the things that he's explaining, right, or trying to explain. He's trying to explain white life, and he's critically reading these things, right? And he's there's so many interesting twisted arguments that he's making. That it's it's really frightening because my worry is this kind of thing could resonate with young white people and not just young white people, older white men. He's probably parroting stuff that these guys have told them around campfires and crap.
So I wonder if you could maybe clarify it just a little bit. So you had underscored the fact that the U.S. is undergirded by serious structural racism that's been taken to a whole new level since the 1970s.
I mean, it's what I'm saying, and I'm just following Michelle Alexander's thesis that it has preserved itself through transforming itself, and in particular, it's transformed its rhetoric. Yeah. Right. So what? Rather than having explicitly racial discourse, you have coded racial language, criminal, thug, whatever, welfare queen or something like that. Right. There's all of these coded these racial codes that enable and conceal the racist policy.
And you think the power of that coded racial language is why there's such a correspondence or correlation between that and the resonance of that racist worldview that's constructed and absorbed and adopted by somebody like Bruce.
I'm saying our world is a double bind in the sense that race is everywhere, but you're not allowed to say it, or you're not, or the official discourse has its can't be described in terms of in terms of simple racism, but simple racism is everywhere, and it's that gap which, on the one hand, is so powerful about a movement like what's come out of Ferguson, right? The Black Lives Matter movement, right? Is all right, let us name this current situation for what it is, right? As a continuation of the history of racism in which black lives don't matter, still don't matter. But it's also that kind of that sense of contradiction also is going to allow this kind of fascist crap to resonate, because it's going to provide it's going to be able to frame itself as critical insight into the society, right? You've been told multiculturalism is the way, or is equality, but in fact, as these guys claim, it's white genocide, and
it's like a revelation.
Yeah,
and you're now along with a select few other people, seeing through the guise of
also
however
one of the other things that's so disturbing and interesting about what he's writing, right, is he's saying things. He's received. He's criticizing the history classes that he's been in, right? So he's received a certain kind of simplistic narrative of how slavery operated, right? If you didn't actually study these things, you might think that all white people owned slaves, and so then he says, and then these people who are I don't know, I guess the people that initiated him into this white supremacist doctrine or something, right, come around and they say, oh, that's just an exaggeration. Only a quarter to a third of whites owned slaves, and it's well, yeah, not every white person owned slaves, right? But all white people have been granted privileges that since the construction of white supremacy, all white people have been granted privileges that black people didn't have, and all white people therefore benefited from that slavery economy and continue to benefit from it today. But so what I'm saying is the way in which we simplistically discuss, in trying to construct a simplistic image of these moral atrocities of the past, we end up setting ourselves up for someone to come in and correct them, and then use that as a seed to plant out that then overturns the entire narrative. And so I think that there's a ton to learn from this sicko's ideology. And, like, may as well just get to the point, right? Like, or at least one of the points that I want to bring up, right, is that, like, one of the things that this whole thing reveals, right, is something that I guess we all knew anyway, but it's like that the word terrorism is nothing but a political propaganda tool used by the U.S. government to further racist wars and further racism within the society too, and also sometimes to combat leftists and anarchists.
Yeah.
Right. So, but
On
the point is, it's just a political tool. It has nothing to do with an act, because this guy was clearly ideologically motivated. He was clearly, clearly acting, for
Politically in a perverse sense, yeah.
Yeah, to instill terror in a community, and also acting strategically in that regard, right? And it's not being called terrorism. At best, it's being called a hate crime. And then, that's just a pretty, that fits in with a lot of stuff, right? And if you're white and you're conservative, you can be a terrorist. If you're white and an activist, you can be, as exemplified by the banner droppers, the anti-fracking banner droppers in Oklahoma, who dropped a banner with glitter on it. And they haven't actually been charged, but they're being threatened with being charged with terrorism as a result of having dropped a banner with glitter on it.
And then so, let's see if I can connect this up in a way that's coherent. The terrorism designation is also very purposive in terms of trying to squelch dissent, and even as we see now with recent legislation, whatever, anything that impedes upon corporate profits is oftentimes labeled
with the
terrorism.
Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act.
And so I'm actually glad Pepper has returned here, maybe for a short period of time, and I'd also like to get his take on this as well as yours, Margaret. So yesterday, I was sitting in the info shop located 214 North Washington, just right next door here to the WDBX station, and it was during the Prisoner Solidarity Working Group we had last night, and there was somebody who spent 4 years at Menard who stopped by, who's I think going to be on the show come this Saturday at midnight. And one of the things that he stressed, which surprised me quite a bit, but maybe not entirely, was that what he was subjected to, he didn't see it as a race thing, at least not wholly. He's like, they're doing that to all poor people, and they're creating a mass of poor people to do that to.
Yeah.
And then so I was just going to maybe not challenge, but provide a little nuance to what you had said before about the way that all white persons had benefited from the slave economy. One of the arguments that Sharon Smith makes in her book Subterranean Fire is that, again, with the populist movement in the 1890s, there was this possibility for a massive black-white cross-racial coalition to struggle for not just political and civil rights, but also economic rights, democratize wealth and ownership, commonize it. And one of the primary ways that was thwarted was by sowing racial divisions, offering this bargain to the poor white workers. You can enjoy your white privilege that will bestow upon you and have these preferential political and civil rights. You're not going to get all the economic justice that you wanted, but you'll get this, and you can also wave that over all of the black persons.
That goes back to the 1600s.
Pepper, do you want to comment?
I was going to ask, we got the phone going there. And so you're basically saying, come and help me out here. You were saying, what were you saying exactly? Sum it up.
And so I was drawing from this argument that historian Sharon Smith makes in her book, that all white workers, it's mistaken to suggest that white workers have actually benefited wholly from racism. They enjoy white privilege, but actually, if the coalitions that seemed possible, say back in the 1890s and maybe again during the 60s and 70s, if that would have borne fruit, they would have benefited that much more, right? Like, because there would have been much further democratization of society, and and then so like she also provides some pretty good evidence to back up this claim, showing that like when black workers had been systematically disenfranchised, white workers had also been much more disenfranchised than many people suspect at first blush. So they'd also been deprived of many of the basic political rights and a say in like any form of democratic participation, when the black workers had also been treated unjustly and had political legislation enacted
They were
against
treated
them.
just as bad, but then they had to be made feel as if they were one step above those who were black. And then so they're proud and poor, but then they're still, no matter how bad off I am, I'm better than that black guy.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So that's just a way of selling the colonial slavery continues, of how this 1% continues to go forth as it confuses and demonizes those people in the 99%.
I missed what y'all's conversation just was because I was listening to a great comment on the phone, and it was somebody who is identified as an older person who said that her experience, or one of her great frustrations with respect to like being in the streets over the last few years, is the way in which people self-segregate even there, where like many protesters are just white, many protesters are just black, or there's different groups, or young or old people don't mix or anything.
I spoke with someone next door here a few days ago, last week, about, I don't know if you in that conversation or not, about how can we help one another. You don't have to come in and join, but then again, what do we have in common? So when we find the air, the water, and the housing and other things, the education that we have in common, how do we fortify all these things that are needed across the board? Now that's where we come together, and needless to say that I am Urban League, or I am NAACP, or I am Baptist, I am Catholic, but we all need education. We all need health. That's where we all need to come together at. So the divisions that we find continually growing in groups and participation, like what's the thing they had in New York, the big
the climate march.
Yeah, that, well then, how in selling these concepts, that's where the trick is. How do we show the commonalities in the concepts that are not seen as your area, my area, is our space. Is our space.
Real quickly, because I think this relates to what I was trying to get at earlier. And so what I was kind of going to ask the two of you, and also our listeners if they want to call in, is what the guy who visited our Prisoner Solidarity Working Group suggests, like if it's not just solely, or maybe even not primarily a racial thing, but like if the structural racism has become increasingly necessary to do what he seems to think is like the main issue at hand, which is the systematic pauperization and impoverization of the mass of the population, and that race has, like maybe even more so than in the past, become like the prevailing way to think about the world in order for that to take place.
Maybe. I'm really skeptical of reducing racism to class, or to merely as a strategy of the ruling class. I think that like it was that, but I think it's got a life of its own. And yes, it's important to like focus on those issues that are like common threats. I would put forward a candidate of like for like that common enemy, even that ought to unite people of all different racial, ethnic, religious groups, and also different political perspectives that are bent on liberation, that common enemy is like the police.
No, the police not your enemy. Who's your enemy is the man down at City Hall.
Yeah,
They're the ones
that man down at City Hall has absolutely no power if there aren't a bunch of men with guns that listen to him for a paycheck.
Those guns are under the direction of those few down at City Hall, and we can direct them if we do something about them.
How can you say that in the wake of what's happened?
Easy, because what we could do is, as I keep telling, I've been saying for many years, the oversight of the police is based upon what is the controlling entity of the city manager.
I think you're putting way too much faith in that hierarchy. The thing is first of all, like cops on the ground, especially not just in Carbondale, right, but especially in cities around this country, right, have a high degree of autonomy and a high degree of immunity with what they do with those.
And who gives it to them?
Fine, but I'm saying they give that to them because those people in City Hall have absolutely no power unless there are the cops there. It's not that the people in City Hall give the power to the cops, it's that the cops give the power to the people in City Hall.
Except I think it's actually much more mutually reinforcing, and there's other elements to it too, and one of those is like the way that ideology is constructed, which is what we've been talking about for this entire broadcast.
Yeah, but I'm saying that the non-negotiable point, right, the point where that dialectic breaks down is that it enters reality with the threat of violence, which is what the police do.
If you had came to me and said that you want to be on the council, and he wants to be on the council, and she wants to be on the council, but we want you, Pepper, as the mayor. Now, we could have then enforced some regulations, some codes to control and minimize or direct our police force.
So what happened to de Blasio in New York, right? When de Blasio in New York, right, decided that, okay, well, I'm gonna actually let the First Amendment matter and let these protests happen, right? What the cops did after the two cops were shot, right? The cops then blamed the mayor for that, went on a work slowdown and started to bankrupt the city, right? Because in fact, the city runs through the police extracting money from poor people. That is to say, if you were to actually, I'm saying you can't get your revolutionary government in power here, right? Because the police will fight back against your attempt to move city government to the left.
Well, I would hate to say we would be resorting to the vigilantes, but if it be necessary, we may have to come up with a new concept.
But this is just it, and this goes back to what I was saying before about when I was saying that since the 1970s, the right wing has been arming itself. Is that they now have, and the NRA? I think that the NRA should be read as a fascist political strategy, and that is to create an armed, scared white populace. They don't advertise membership to black people. In fact, back when the Black Panthers were invoking the Second Amendment rights to bear arms, the NRA was against that at that point, right? And then they changed their tune with the construction of the new racial caste system, and then it became about defending white people from criminals.
Hey, I gotta go, but later on, today sometime maybe we can structure a conversation to do on my show tomorrow. You're more than welcome.
I gotta work tomorrow.
I don't have enough. I should be here every day.
Felix asked, how many shows do you have?
Not enough. Anyway, I'll see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock.
I gotta work, sorry. Maybe my boss is listening. Hey, Lansky. What's up? See ya. What were we talking about?
So, yeah, I wanted to press you just a little bit. You genuinely believe that the dialectic or the process of mutual reinforcement between the political class and the corporate media and the economic elite, which are all very much in alliance structurally, and then of course the police, and also the military apparatus, the prison industrial complex. So the way that brute force is used, you think it breaks down when in terms of the necessity of brute force to maintain the system.
and what I would say is like, if you didn't like, there's all sorts of ideology. There's all sorts of like the way that hegemony is constructed, right? That people like offer up their consent and believe these things, right? But like reality is slippery, and there's also always these kinds of exceptions and these moments that and well, there's a few things. Like one, there's always a class of people who maybe aren't bought into that kind of ideology, but that need to be policed because of it, because of their material situation or because of their ideology, right? And so that threat of violence has to be there as like kind of holding back that what would be like a wave of social transformation and experimentation. And if that wave was allowed to go, let us say, if the police weren't there holding that wave of social experimentation back, then those other people that currently are like captured by the ideology might find themselves in a similar position or pushed in that direction, right? And so what I'm saying is that it's there's all sorts of things keeping people bought into the system, but right now actually like it's less and less ideology, and it's more and more just brute force, and it's always grounded in that threat of brute force. And that's why I think like the police are properly managed enemy. But this is the thing is like the police aren't just the people with badges, right? Like in some way, I mean, I don't.
No, go ahead.
Well, I'm saying like there's all sorts of ways that racism is policed apart from people that are just like officially designated cops.
So you're thinking about like in the institutional context, and not just like those that had the badges on that are like having to beating people with batons.
What like this guy Dylan Roof is, right? Like in some ways, like kind of like he's like a lone wolf, like vigilante kind of thing. That's like a I mean, right? In like. I want to read more about it and think about it before I make the kind of claims I'm about to make.
Okay.
So, which is not something I usually do.
So, like, I was just gonna say that I'm, in general, quite a bit skeptical of any fetishization, including of like one particular target identified as upholding a system, because I think like there's all these different elements, and like I think if it was just brute force, just like straight up authoritarianism, then we'd have like a very different system.
I'm saying it's not just brute force, but brute force is the necessary condition for all the other things.
But that's not to suggest, or maybe it is. You can tell me that. In fact, I mean, I think that just by recognizing it as the exercise of brute force, like the police being an institution that does that it's not the institution and it's not the individuals that act the most insidiously within the system, because that would maybe be the financial elite and those who actually cause quite a bit more harm in the end. But that harm would not be enabled if not for institutions like the police.
Just like I was saying to Pepper, right? The power of the people in City Hall only ultimately depends upon the power of a network of coercion that's going to enforce the magic words that they say called laws. The power of people in finance is only ultimately sustained by a network of people who are going to use violence to enforce the efficacy of the money system. Right, money has all sorts of power, right? But that power relies upon the fact that we need to respect the rules of corporate private property or whatever, because there's the threat of the police. Now they can distance us from that threat in all sorts of ways. They can just put security.
And money also takes on a power of its own, much like you said. Other institutions.
Sure, but I'm saying that the necessary condition for that is the threat of violence in our society. Maybe there could be a society in which money didn't operate like that. That society is not one we have.
So, what then of this threat of violence that we've been discussing on this show now? The exercise of like putting white supremacist doctrines into practice. Where does like I mean, I know you said how does it relate, and then what does it say about like the way that like power is changing, if it is, or cementing. I don't know how you were thinking about it.
I don't know, right? I mean, like, what we're seeing, I think, is like a period of like intensification and polarization of these things, and we've seen, like, obviously, like, we've seen like protests and rowdy responses on the part of black people to police killings, and now we're seeing like this kid who's like vigilante that has an explicit white supremacist ideology, like making a kind of like counter move in like a race war that he imagines, and that kind of polarization is like really frightening, and it's also like yeah, things are getting serious. Things have been serious, but it's like in terms of the white supremacists are apparently no longer like, I don't know, like I guess like this kid like represents like a new generation of that, and that's like frightening to me, and that's what I'm thinking about, right? That like there'll be other people. He's gonna be like a martyr or a hero to like a whole bunch of like younger people or older people. People are gonna be like inspired by his action, and also on the other side, right? Like this is something that like we were talking about earlier. It's like what? Like I seriously don't know, and I'm like, and this is what you're saying. It's like it's so like discerning. It's like I don't know what it's like to be black in this society, and I don't know what it's like to be black in society after this. Like I feel like this is something that maybe I don't know, maybe like the pervasiveness of white supremacy has been like so widespread in black experience that it's just like one more thing. Like, but I think what people were saying is like, well, like church is maybe like the one place where many black people felt like they were safe, you know, or at least relatively safe, and like yeah, the idea that like I mean, what 9/11 like did for like the American psyche, you know, like just I don't know. I don't want to compare it to it, I guess, but it's like you see the kind of like super response that was like that white people experienced, or at least that Americans experienced as a whole, right? Like after that kind of like recognizing how like threatened you were. Like I imagine that's become so intensified after this for black people that like that really disturbs me. I don't know if I'm like
the intensification of fear as a result of
just
but
like,
like this is
like
it's very different, right?
Just, like, walk up and start yelling you down, like
but this is very different. Like so when like with 9/11. The intensification of fear was then channeled into wars of aggression, and also like further criminalization of the population and everything else. So it was used for what we might call ruling class purposes. But like this fear also, I mean, if that's what it is, and like you know, I'm sure it's much more complex than that. But like, it could also be like a potential mobilizing force too, like when so like now in the wake of Ferguson and Baltimore and all the street protests that we've been talking about, but then also this, and also like the like recognition that like the ways in which like the new forms that white supremacy is taking, like that, like we've already seen like a massive response to. In some respects, it's pretty marginalized in the media.
Yeah, I mean, people obviously we're gonna have to like reflect on it and strategize in advance to it. But it's and yeah, maybe it makes like the reality of the situation more clear.
I have one last question before we end the show. Okay. Because I think this is important. This is something that I'm interested in exploring. So, I told you before we got on that I wanted to read this guy's manifesto, and like for the reasons that you outlined on this broadcast, because it's kind of enlightening. And I told you that I had previously read the 140 some page manifesto that the shooter in Isla Vista, California, Elliot Rodger, who specifically targeted women because he was unable to find a girlfriend, like they wouldn't have sex with him, and it was straight up like misogyny, like in the most intensified way. And so like what does this and so like in this case, like racism in like the most intensified, in one of the most intensified forms, in the horrible forms you can imagine, like encroaching upon like this quite literally like sacred territory for many black persons. Does this say something about like the way that this like various kinds of animus is being channeled in these like really gross and hate-filled sorts of ways, like whether it's hatred of women or hatred of black persons or hatred of immigrants with xenophobia, which like was widespread after 9/11.
Which animus?
The insecurity and all the other forms of alienation that like say many poor white people feel, like is this then being channeled into like all these different forms?
Right? Like I don't know about that from this least.
Sure. But I think that's like,
yes, obviously class is an important dynamic, and it's one of the ways in which like the vast majority of people are being like dominated. It's a point of like commonality. We can't reduce it to that.
Sure, I didn't know that, and that's actually what I was trying to counter. Is suggesting that like there's all of these multifarious forms of oppression that are being strengthened by tapping into like insecurities and alienation that isn't just reducible to class.
Sure, that sounds good. That's one of the ways. I mean, I think that's like in this like situation, maybe in part in a situation of intense economic exploitation, you're saying there's this like intensification of these other forms of oppression. Yeah, I mean it's like the social whole that we encounter, right? Like by which I mean like a collective social experience that hasn't yet been divided up in terms of these categories, right? Is like so damaging, and unless you have, I think this, right? Like unless you have like the like a critical analysis of the power structures that occur, and that kind of means all of them, like patriarchy, racism, capitalism, state. Right? Unless you recognize that those institutions are what is like what are those power structures are what are like generating this like widespread social anxiety, this sense of the material impoverishment of some communities, the material exaggeration of others, and like the misery of people experience.
No, not like
And unless you're like oriented toward challenging those institutions, like it's just gonna go crazy in one way or another.
Well, that about does it for our show.
Yeah.
We've exceeded our time, so I apologize for that.
To bring my
But
little case.
throw it to Phillips.
Let me just say one thing, because I'm worried that I just like reinforced the thing that I wanted to not say. That like, because I didn't want to say that he was crazy.
No, I knew that.
It's a crazy act, or whatever. But like, the fact is, like, he was just like the enemy of everything that's good. And
I know. That's
wrong,
why,
not crazy. And his like thought, his reflections were like arguments that resonate actually quite well, like the dominant tradition of like the founding fathers of America or something. They just had a different strategy.
Which I taste big, huh?
Right. The guy
well,
wasn't.
yeah, I mean, they were 200.
He was like
so,
a part of a long and like ingrained tradition of white supremacy in this country. And
yeah, this is
that's not crazy. It's just unjust and wrong.
What about touching those running water?
You can listen to
well, they want to be there, but they don't. They basically what they told me is that they are in the middle of getting certification from the state in some fashion to have it travel elsewhere. And he's like,
Here's
if
to the
we
state
get
of
it back in time,
Mississippi.
we'll have it there. If not, we'll be out there.
For underneath their borders, the devil draws no
This is
line.
Jeannie's shop.
If you drag her muddy rivers, fameless body to a find. Oh, the factories of the forest after the fine bride. The calendar's lie when it reads the present time. Mississippi, find yourself another country to be part of. And here's to the people of Mississippi who say the folks up north, they just don't understand. And they tremble in the shadows at the thunder of
Yeah,
the
she's
blast.
Ladies
Oh,
Hades
the
today.
sweating of their souls,
Get
and
your
the
favorite
blood
MC
on their hands. For they
You
smile
can
from their
use the
shoulders at the murder of a man.
Awesome.
Is that what's going to be better than
If when you guys get the bill, you know what I'm saying, just show it to me. Because frankly, I don't really have good grasp on, the whole power usage thing. When I've talked to them, they don't sound like they need any trouble with power. But last year, we ran everything. All that street. Okay, everything. And we burned it out several times. I mean, I had that box literally open. The city just ended up giving me a key, and I was just like, use the broom, put it back, blue, put it back, blue, put it back. You know, I mean, literally, it was the most insane thing ever. But we were riding the edge, so my feeling was just like, we need more power, but not that much more. So I didn't like, it's not going to work. It's a huge generator to do it.
But it does sound cute.
That's the big post. Hey, you should put one up at the 9
And here's to judges of Mississippi who wear the robe of honor as they crawl to the court. They're guarding all the bastions of their phony legal court. Ooh, justice is a stranger when the prisoners report. When the black man stands accused, the trial is always short. You torn out Mississippi, find yourself another country to be part of. And here's to the government of Mississippi. In the swamp of their bureaucracy, they're always bogging down. And criminals are posing as the mayors of the town. And they hope that no one sees the sights and no one hears the sounds. And the speeches of the governor are the rings of a clown. Oh, here's to the land you torn out, torn out. Mississippi, find yourself another country to be part of. And here's to the laws of Mississippi. Congressmen will gather in a circus of delay, while the Constitution's drowning in an ocean of decay. Unwed mothers should be sterilized, I've even heard them say. Yes, corruption can be classic in the Mississippi way. Whoa, here's to the land you torn out, torn out.
Mississippi, find yourself another country to be part of. And here's to the churches of Mississippi, where the cross was made of silver, now it's caked with rust, and the Sunday morning sermons pander to their lust. Oh, the fallen face of Jesus is choking in the dust, and heaven only knows in which God they can trust. Oh, here's to the land who turned out the heart out. Mississippi, find yourself another country to be part of.